At 5:27 p.m. on the 9th of April 2008, a tornado touched down in a pasture just southwest of Mountainburg, Arkansas. The National Weather Service in Tulsa had issued a tornado warning for Crawford County 13 minutes earlier. At 5:14 p.m., that warning was based on radar signatures indicating strong rotation within a supercell thunderstorm moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. The storm had already produced baseball-sized hail near the town of Van Buren. Residents were urged to take shelter. But in the 5 minutes between that warning and the tornado's arrival, the storm accelerated and intensified. The rotation tightened. The funnel touched the ground. At 5:28 p.m., the tornado crossed Interstate 40 at a point roughly 2 miles southwest of Mountainburg. Witnesses reported seeing a dark, rain-wrapped column of debris moving quickly across the highway. Two semi-trucks were flipped. One driver was injured. Other motorists abandoned their vehicles and ran for cover in a roadside ditch. The tornado did not pause. It continued northeast at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. The damage path was already 300 yards wide. At 5:29 p.m., the tornado entered the southern edge of Mountainburg, a town of about 600 people. It struck a row of mobile homes first. One home was completely destroyed. The debris was scattered across a cornfield. Inside that home, a 72-year-old woman was killed instantly. Her body was found 100 feet away from the foundation. She did not have time to reach the community storm shelter a quarter mile down the road. The tornado was moving too fast. At 5:30 p.m., the tornado hit the Mountainburg High School. The school was a brick structure with a large gymnasium on the west side. The gymnasium roof was torn off. The exterior walls collapsed inward. Students had been dismissed for the day just 40 minutes earlier, but many were still inside for after-school activities. The athletic teams were in the locker rooms. Band practice was finishing. The principal had heard the tornado warning on a radio and announced a shelter in place. The students filed into the interior hallways. The gymnasium was empty. When the roof came off, no one was inside. No one was killed at the school. But the building was so damaged it would never reopen. The town would have to build a new school. At 5:31 p.m., the tornado crossed the downtown area. It hit a church built in 1908. The steeple was sheared off. The sanctuary roof was lifted and dropped 30 feet to the east. The pastor was in his office. He had taken cover under his desk. The desk was crushed by falling brick. He survived with a broken arm. The church's fellowship hall was flattened. That building had been used as a voting precinct 2 days earlier. The polls were empty now. The church would not hold services again until Christmas. At 5:32 p.m., the tornado moved into a residential neighborhood on the north side of town. It destroyed 6 houses and damaged 18 others. One of the destroyed houses belonged to a family of 4. They had no basement. They had no storm shelter. They huddled in a bathtub in the interior bathroom. The bathtub was found intact, but the family was not. The father was trapped under the collapsed roof. His wife and 2 children were pinned next to him. Rescue crews arrived within minutes. The father and 1 child were extricated alive. The mother and the other child did not survive. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. They had not been wearing helmets. In Tornado Alley communities, many families keep bicycle helmets in their safe rooms. This family did not. At 5:33 p.m., the tornado exited the town limits and continued northeast into the Ozark National Forest. It tore a path through dense oak and hickory trees. Thousands of trees were snapped or uprooted. The debris field in the forest was so severe that the United States Forest Service had to close a section of the Ozark Highlands Trail for 6 weeks. The tornado finally lifted at 5:42 p.m. near the community of Cass, Arkansas, 15 miles northeast of Mountainburg. It had been on the ground for 15 minutes. Its path length was 11 miles. Its maximum width was 600 yards. The National Weather Service later rated the tornado EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with peak winds estimated at 145 miles per hour. 2 people were dead, 31 were injured. The total property damage was estimated at $12 million. What happened? The tornado was part of a larger outbreak that affected the southern plains and the lower Mississippi Valley on April 9 and 10, 20 right. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for the region 2 days earlier. The risk was upgraded to high on the morning of April 9. The meteorological conditions were textbook. A strong mid-level trough moving across the Rockies, a dry line advancing through Oklahoma, and warm, moist air streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico. The atmosphere was highly unstable. The wind shear was extreme. Forecasters knew that supercells were possible. They knew that tornadoes could occur. What they did not know was exactly when and where. The storm that produced the Mountainburg tornado began as a non-severe thunderstorm near the Arkansas-Oklahoma border around 3 p.m. By 4:30 p.m., it had intensified rapidly. Radar showed a hook echo at 5:12 p.m. The tornado warning was issued 2 minutes later. That warning gave the town 13 minutes of lead time. 13 minutes is considered excellent by National Weather Service standards. The average lead time for tornado warnings in 2008 was about 13 minutes. The problem is that 13 minutes is not always enough. Mountainburg had one outdoor warning siren. It was located on top of the fire station in the center of town. The siren was activated manually by the county emergency manager. He received the tornado warning at 5:14 p.m. He drove to the fire station and activated the siren at 5:18 p.m. That gave the town 9 minutes of notice. But the siren could not be heard in the southern part of town where the mobile homes were located. The terrain is hilly. The sound did not carry. The 72-year-old woman who died never heard the siren. Her neighbors said they heard only a faint wail like a distant ambulance. The warning also went out through weather radios. Many homes had them, but the weather radio signal was weak in the river valleys. The Ozark Mountains blocked transmissions. Some residents said their weather radios did not sound until the tornado was already on top of them. The National Weather Service later upgraded the transmitter network in western Arkansas, but not until 2010. For Mountainburg in 2008, the warning system had gaps. After the tornado, investigators from the National Weather Service and the Federal Emergency Management Agency examined the damage. They interviewed survivors. They studied the radar data. They found no single point of failure. The forecast was accurate. The warning was timely. The response was fast. Emergency medical crews were on scene within 15 minutes. The National Guard arrived within an hour. The local sheriff coordinated search and rescue, but 2 people were still dead. The question became what could have been done differently. One answer was shelters. Mountainburg did not have a public tornado shelter. The town had discussed building one after a nearby tornado in 1996, but the funding never materialized. The high school gym was used as a shelter for sporting events, but it was not a designated safe room. The church basement was unfinished and damp. The fire station had a small room that could hold maybe 20 people. For a town of 600, that was not enough. The 2 families who died had no safe place to go. They did not have basements. They did not have in-ground shelters. They were in structures that could not withstand an EF3 tornado. That is the reality for many towns in Arkansas. The bedrock is shallow, the water table is high, basements are rare, storm shelters are expensive. For low-income families, the cost of a shelter can be more than the value of the home. Another answer was communication. The siren system was inadequate. The weather radio coverage was spotty. The local media did not have a dedicated channel for severe weather. Residents relied on television broadcasts from Fort Smith and Fayetteville, but the tornado was rain-wrapped and did not appear on camera until it was already hitting the interstate. The first video of the tornado was captured by a viewer who lived on a hill north of town. He uploaded it to YouTube the next day. It was grainy. It showed a dark mass moving through rain. It was not a clear image. The lack of visual confirmation may have led some residents to believe the tornado was not real. In a town where warnings are often false alarms, people hesitate. That hesitation can be fatal. The deeper question became why the tornado warning system relies so heavily on radar and sirens when radar has limitations and sirens can be silenced by terrain. The National Weather Service had known for years that the Ozarks were a difficult environment for weather detection. The nearest Doppler radar was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, about 90 miles away. The radar beam was blocked by the Boston Mountains. The lowest scan could not detect rotation below 3,000 feet above ground level. That means storms can develop tornadic circulation below the radar horizon. The Mountainburg tornado was likely on the ground for several minutes before the radar showed a tornado signature. The warning was issued based on rotation aloft, not on confirmed touchdown. That is standard procedure. But the time between rotation aloft and touchdown can be very short. In this case, it was about 7 minutes. 7 minutes is not enough time for everyone to get to safety. It takes time to understand the threat. It takes time to decide what to do. It takes time to move small children, elderly family members, or people with disabilities. The average human response time to a tornado warning is between 4 and 8 minutes, depending on the time of day and the person's awareness. For those who were already watching the storm, the lead time was enough. For those who were not, it was not. The Mountainburg tornado remains significant because it illustrates the gap between the technical capability of modern meteorology and the practical reality of community preparedness. The science was good, the forecast was good, the warning was issued. But the system still failed 2 families. That failure was not caused by incompetence. It was caused by a combination of geography, infrastructure, and human nature. The event forced meteorologists and emergency managers to ask hard questions about how warnings are communicated and how communities can be made more resilient. In the years that followed, the National Weather Service invested in new radar technology, including a dual polarization upgrade that improved detection of tornado debris signatures. The Storm Prediction Center refined its forecast products. The state of Arkansas established a grant program for community storm shelters in rural counties. Mountainburg used that grant to build a shelter next to the new high school, which opened in 2010. The shelter can hold 300 people. It is used for basketball games, town meetings, and severe weather events. But for the people who lost loved ones on April 9, 2008, the improvements came too late. The two victims were buried in the same cemetery north of town. Their graves are marked with simple stones. The tornado is still remembered every year on the anniversary. The town holds a memorial service at the church that was rebuilt. The pastor who survived gives a sermon about resilience and hope. The names of the dead are read aloud, then the siren is tested. At 5:27 p.m. on the 9th of April 2008, a tornado touched down near Mountainburg, Arkansas. The town that day was not prepared, though it had done everything it was supposed to do. The sirens sounded, the warnings went out, the people tried, but the tornado was faster than the system. And that is the story that investigators would spend months trying to understand. Not because the science was wrong, but because the system had limits that only a direct hit could expose. At 5:27 p.m. on the 9th of April 2008, a tornado touched down near Mountainburg, Arkansas. The town that day was not prepared, though it had done everything it was supposed to do. The sirens sounded, the warnings went out, the people tried, but the tornado was faster than the system, and that is the story that investigators would spend months trying to understand, not because the science was wrong, but because the system had limits that only a direct hit could expose. What investigators found in the days after the tornado was a pattern of small failures that together created a deadly gap. The National Weather Service survey team arrived on the morning of April 10th. They walked the damage path from southwest to northeast. The path was 11 miles long and up to 3/4 of a mile wide. They documented 400 structures damaged or destroyed. They rated the tornado an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with winds estimated at 145 miles per hour. That rating meant the tornado could lift cars, collapse well-built homes, and send debris flying at lethal speeds. The team focused on the two fatalities. The first was a 72-year-old woman living in a mobile home on the southern edge of town. Her home was a single-wide manufactured house from the 1970s, tied down with metal straps to concrete anchors. The straps were insufficient for an EF3. The home was lifted off its foundation, rolled twice, and came to rest upside down in a ditch. Her body was found 50 feet away, thrown into a cluster of trees. There were no signs that she had tried to leave. The medical examiner determined she died from blunt force trauma caused by the impact of debris and the forces of the tornado. The second fatality was a 48-year-old man who lived in a frame house on the same road. His home was a 2-story wood frame structure built in the 1920s. It had no basement. The home was swept clean off its foundation. He was found under debris in what had been the living room. He had been sheltering in an interior hallway, the standard advice for those without a basement. That advice failed because the tornado was strong enough to destroy the entire structure, including the interior walls. The safest place in a house that is taken off its foundation is nowhere. Investigators interviewed neighbors who survived. One survivor lived just 200 yards away. His home was a brick ranch with a partial basement. He heard the siren, went to the basement, and heard the storm pass. His house sustained roof damage but remained standing. The difference was the basement. Another survivor was in a mobile home park on the north side of town. She had a weather radio that went off at 5:14 p.m. She left her home and drove to the fire station, where she sheltered in the small safe room. Her mobile home was destroyed. She was unharmed. She had the means to get to a safe place. The 72-year-old woman did not. She had no car. She had no nearby shelter. She relied on the siren. She never heard it. The failure of the siren was a critical point. The emergency manager activated the siren at 5:18 p.m., but the sound did not reach the southern part of town. The terrain between the fire station and that area included a hill 150 feet high and a dense tree line. The siren was a single Model TS1, manufactured in the 1960s. It had a range of about 1 mile in open terrain. The southern neighborhoods were nearly 2 miles away. The sound waves were blocked, reflected, and absorbed. The result was a signal that was inaudible above the storm noise. Residents there reported hearing only a low hum which they mistook for wind. The weather radio network also had gaps. The nearest NOAA transmitter was in Fayetteville, about 30 miles away. The signal had to travel over the Boston Mountains, which absorb VHF frequencies. Many residents had weather radios, but they were set to receive alerts for their county. The alert went out at 5:14 p.m., but the transmission was delayed because the system used the specific area message encoding same protocol which requires the receiver to decode the signal. In mountain valleys, the signal strength was low. Some radios did not activate until the storm was overhead. Others activated only after the tornado had passed. The National Weather Service later analyzed the radar data in detail. The tornado formed from a supercell thunderstorm that developed over eastern Oklahoma that afternoon. The storm moved into Arkansas around 4 p.m. The first severe thunderstorm warning was issued at 4:32 p.m. The first tornado warning was issued at 5:14 p.m. The radar showed rotation at about 4,000 feet above ground level at 5:09 p.m. The warning was issued 5 minutes later based on standard criteria. but the rotation rapidly descended. By 5:20 p.m., the velocity data suggested a tornado was on the ground. The radar beam at that range was scanning at about 3,000 feet above ground level due to the curvature of the Earth and the blocking by mountains. The tornado was likely on the ground for at least 2 minutes before the radar saw it. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a tornado watch for the region at 2:30 p.m. The watch was valid until 10 p.m. The forecasters noted the potential for strong tornadoes. The environment was favorable: high humidity, strong wind shear, and a dry line moving east. The supercell that produced the Mountainburg tornado was one of several in the area. One other tornado touched down near Clarksville, about 30 miles east, at 6:10 p.m. That was an E-phone. No one died in that one. The investigation also looked at the response of the local emergency services. The County Emergency Operations Center was activated at 5:15 p.m., 1 minute after the warning. The sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the southern part of town to warn residents, but they could not reach the area before the tornado hit. The tornado touched down at 5:27 p.m. The deputies were still en route at 5:30 p.m. They arrived to find destruction. The search and rescue began immediately. The fire department used chainsaws to cut through debris. The county coroner arrived at 6:15 p.m. The two bodies were recovered within 2 hours. The Arkansas Department of Emergency Management sent a team to assess the damage. They recommended that Mountainburg apply for federal disaster assistance. The governor declared a state of emergency on April 10th. The Federal Emergency Management Agency conducted a preliminary damage assessment and determined that the damage was not severe enough to warrant a major disaster declaration. The estimated property damage was $2 million. That was below the threshold for federal assistance. The town was on its own. The lack of a federal declaration meant that Mountainburg could not receive funding for individual assistance. Homeowners could apply for low-interest loans from the Small Business Administration, but many did not qualify because their homes were not insured. The 72-year-old woman had no homeowner's insurance. Her mobile home was a total loss. Her family could not afford to replace it. The 48-year-old man had a mortgage and insurance, but the insurance company contested the claim, arguing that the damage was caused by flood, not wind. The case dragged on for 3 years. He had no living relatives to pursue it. The insurance company eventually paid a fraction of the policy. The question of why the tornado warning system failed is not a simple one. It is a question about resource allocation, geography, and the limitations of technology. The National Weather Service operates 122 Doppler radar sites across the country. The nearest to Mountainburg is in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That radar was installed in 1995. In 2008, it was still using the original technology. The radar beam could not see below 3,000 feet in that area due to the mountains. That is a known limitation. The NWS had a plan to install a radar in Fort Smith, Arkansas, but that plan was not funded until 2012, 4 years after the tornado. That radar, called a terminal Doppler weather radar, was originally used for aviation weather detection. It was repurposed for the southern Ozarks. It could scan at lower altitudes. But for Mountainburg in 2008, that radar was just a hope. Another factor was the lack of storm spotters. The county had a spotter network of about 20 trained volunteers, but most lived in the northern part of the county. On that afternoon, a severe thunderstorm warning was in effect and spotters were deployed. But the tornado was rain-wrapped. Spotters could not see it until it was directly on top of them. One spotter reported seeing a black wall approaching from the southwest at 5:25 p.m. He tried to relay a report, but his radio could not reach the dispatch center because of the terrain. He had to drive to a hilltop to get a signal. By then, the tornado had already hit. The spotter network was a volunteer effort. Training sessions were held twice a year. Attendance was low. The county had no paid emergency manager until 2007. The person who activated the siren was the first paid emergency manager hired just 6 months before the tornado. He had undergone basic training, but he had never worked a large-scale event. He made the right decisions. He activated the siren. He coordinated with the sheriff. He opened the Emergency Operations Center. But the limitations of the system were beyond his control. The broader lesson of the Mountainburg tornado is that weather warnings are only as effective as the infrastructure that supports them. A warning issued by the most accurate forecast in the world is useless if no one hears it. A siren that does not reach the people who need it is a failing siren. A weather radio that does not activate in time is a failing radio. A community without shelters is a community at risk. These are not failures of science. They are failures of investment. In the years after the tornado, the town rebuilt. The mobile home park was leveled and never rebuilt. The families who lived there moved away. The church was rebuilt with a reinforced steel frame. The new high school was built with a safe room that meets FEMA standards. The shelter is used not only for storms but also for community events. It is a reminder that preparedness can be built into public buildings, but it costs money. The grant for the shelter was $150,000. That amount was not available in 2008. The two families who lost their homes did not rebuild. The 72-year-old woman's children sold the lot. It is now a vacant lot overgrown with weeds. The man's house was never rebuilt. The foundation is still there, a square of concrete with a few pieces of rebar protruding. The property was sold for back taxes in 2009. The new owner has not built anything. The tornado that killed 2 people in Mountainburg was not a rare event. Tornadoes of EF3 strength occur in Arkansas every few years. The conditions that produced it were typical for a spring severe weather outbreak. The failures that caused the deaths were not unique to Mountainburg. They occur in rural towns across the plains and the south, where the population is sparse, the terrain is difficult, and the funding for infrastructure is limited. The event is a case study for emergency managers and meteorologists. It is taught in training courses. It is used as an example of what can go wrong even when everything seems to go right. What happened in Mountainburg was not a mystery. The science was solid. The warning was timely. The siren was activated. The people tried, but the system had a gap. The gap was filled by a tornado, and 2 people died because the gap was not covered by a siren, a radio, a shelter, or a plan. That is the hard truth that the town has lived with for years. The story does not end with the memorial service. It continues every spring when the storm season returns. The town holds a tornado drill every April 9th. The siren is tested at 5:27 p.m. The children in the new high school go to the shelter. The teachers take attendance. The superintendent makes an announcement over the intercom. It is a routine, but for those who remember the day, the siren sounds different. It is not just a test. It is a reminder that the system can only do so much. The rest is up to the people. And that is the lesson of Mountainburg, but the lesson of Mountainburg is not confined to a single town. It extends across the region, across the state, across the entire network of rural communities that face the same vulnerabilities every spring. And the lesson did not end there. In the days that followed the tornado, while the debris was still being cleared and the 2 families were burying their dead, a series of questions began to surface. Questions that did not have easy answers. Questions that would take years to address. At 8 a.m. on April 10, 2008, the National Weather Service office in Tulsa issued its preliminary storm report for the Mountainburg tornado. The report listed the tornado as an EF3, estimated peak winds at 160 miles per hour, path length at 12.5 miles, maximum width at 500 yards. It noted that the tornado was rain-wrapped and that no warning was issued until 5:14 p.m., 6 minutes before the touchdown. The report also included a comment. Warning was issued based on radar-indicated rotation. Spotter confirmation was not possible until after the tornado had passed. That comment became a focal point for the investigation that followed. The NWS conducted an internal review of the warning process. They found that the lead forecaster on duty that day had correctly identified the developing rotation at 5:07 p.m. The storm was over the Cookson Hills in Oklahoma, moving northeast at 40 miles per hour. The forecaster issued a severe thunderstorm warning at 5:07 p.m. He waited until 5:14 p.m. to issue the tornado warning because he needed to confirm rotation on the radar. The radar data showed a mesocyclone at 5:10 p.m., but the rotation was weak. By 5:12 p.m., the rotation had strengthened significantly. The forecaster made the call to upgrade, but the time it took to write the warning, transmit it, and have it broadcast cut the lead time to just 6 minutes. The NWS review concluded that the forecaster had followed proper procedures. The rotation was not strong enough to warrant a tornado warning until 5:12 p.m. The warning was issued at 5:14 p.m. The technology was not capable of seeing the tornado itself. The forecasters were reliant on radar signatures. In that situation, 6 minutes of lead time was considered acceptable, but for the people in the southern part of Mountainburg, it was not enough. The review also noted that the radar beam was blocked by the Boston Mountains to the south. The lowest scan angle of the Tulsa radar was 0.5 degrees. At a distance of 75 miles, that beam was at an altitude of approximately 5,000 feet above ground level. The tornado formed at around 2,000 feet. The radar never saw the rotation near the surface. It saw it at mid-levels. The forecaster made the warning based on that mid-level rotation, but the tornado had already touched down. This was a known limitation. The NWS had been aware of the radar gap for years. They had applied for funding to install a low-level radar in western Arkansas, but the request was denied. The question of how to improve the system was taken up by the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management. In the summer of 2008, they convened a task force of meteorologists, emergency managers, and county officials. They analyzed the Mountainburg event and identified several critical gaps. The first was the radar gap. The second was the lack of a reliable warning dissemination system. The third was the absence of shelters in vulnerable areas. The fourth was the need for a coordinated response between multiple counties. The task force released its report in December 2008. It made 13 recommendations. The first was to expand the storm spotter network. The second was to install automated weather stations in the Boston Mountains. The third was to improve the radio communication system for spotters and emergency responders. The fourth was to conduct annual drills for tornado warning activation. The fifth was to secure funding for a new radar site in western Arkansas. Each of these recommendations came with a cost. The total price tag was estimated at $2.5 million. The state legislature allocated $500,000 for the first year. The rest was to come from federal grants. Some grants were approved, others were not. By 2015, the spotter network had grown from 20 to 70 volunteers. A new radio repeater was installed on a mountain near Mountainburg. But the radar site in Fort Smith was not funded until 2012, and it was not operational until 2014. For 6 years, the gap remained. In the meantime, the town of Mountainburg had to find its own ways to cope. The high school safe room was completed in 2010. The cost was $150,000, paid for by a FEMA hazard mitigation grant. The grant required a 25% local match, which was $37,500. The town raised the money through a bond measure passed by the voters. The bond was 0.5 mils on property taxes. It passed with 72% approval. The safe room can hold 400 people. It is built to withstand winds of 200 miles per hour. The town holds public open houses every spring to encourage residents to learn where it is and how to get there, but not everyone uses it. On April 10, 2012, the 4th anniversary of the tornado, a severe thunderstorm watch was issued for Crawford County at 3 p.m. The high school was in session. The superintendent ordered the students to the safe room at 3:15 p.m. based on a decision to use it as a drill. But many parents called the school, asking why the siren had not been activated. The siren had not been activated because no tornado warning had been issued. The storm produced a weak tornado near the southern edge of the county, but it did not touch down near Mountainburg. The confusion highlighted a problem. The siren was still the primary means of warning, and the siren still could not be heard in several neighborhoods. In 2013, the town applied for another grant to install a second siren. The cost was $30,000. The grant was approved. The new siren was placed on a hill near the intersection of Highway 71 and County Road 234. It covers the area where the trailer park once stood. The old siren, the one that had been activated on April 9, 2008, was still in place near the fire station. Both sirens are tested every Wednesday at noon, but the terrain remains a problem. The new siren can be heard in most of the town, but pockets of dead air remain, especially in the valleys. The question of why the 72-year-old woman did not hear the siren has no definitive answer. Her mobile home was located in a small valley, about half a mile from the nearest siren. The wind that day was from the south, pushing the sound away from her home. She was 72 years old. She had a hearing impairment. She did not own a weather radio. She did not have a television. She relied on her neighbors to tell her when a storm was coming. That afternoon, she was alone. Her neighbor, a man who lived 200 yards away, tried to call her. He got no answer. He ran to her home, but the tornado had already passed. He found her body in the debris. The 48-year-old man was at his home on the north side of town. He lived alone. He did not have a weather radio either. He had a television, but it was turned off at the time of the warning. He was working in his garage. The siren was closer to his home, but the sound was muffled by the garage door and the roar of the storm. He may not have heard it. He may have heard it and not understood what it meant. He may have tried to run to his basement but did not make it in time. No one knows. There were no witnesses. These two deaths have become a recurring subject of discussion in the emergency management community. Every training session on tornado warning dissemination uses Mountainburg as a case study. The instructors ask the same questions. What more could have been done? Could a door-to-door warning have saved them? Could a police car with a loudspeaker have reached them? Could a text message alert have made a difference? The answers are not clear. The man who activated the siren, the emergency manager hired 6 months before the tornado, resigned in 2010. He said he could not stop thinking about the 2 people who died. He moved to a different county and took a job in road maintenance. Does not speak about the event. The fire chief retired in 2010. He still lives in Mountainburg. He told a reporter in 2018 that he can still see the woman's car crushed under the tree. He said he does not go to that part of town anymore. The memorial service held on April 12, 2008 at the Baptist Church was attended by over 300 people. The governor did not attend. A representative from the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management spoke. The mayor gave a short speech. The families of the 2 victims sat in the front row. The daughter of the 72-year-old woman later said that she did not blame the town. She blamed the weather. She said her mother had lived in Mountainburg for 40 years and had never worried about tornadoes. She believed the storm was an act of God. The niece of the 48-year-old man had a different view. She told a reporter that she thought the warning system should have been better. She said her uncle was a smart man. He would have gone to the basement if he had known. The basement. The house of the 48-year-old man had a basement. It was an old farmhouse built in the 1920s. The basement had a concrete floor and a wood ceiling. It was not a safe room. It would not have withstood a direct hit from an EF3 tornado, but it might have provided some protection. The man never made it to the basement. His body was found in the hallway near the back door as if he had been trying to open it when the house collapsed. The door was still closed. The threshold was covered with debris. The house was built on a slab. The basement was only accessible from the outside through a bulkhead door. The door was around the side of the house. The man would have had to go outside to get to it. That may have been why he did not try. The tornado was already on top of him. He had seconds. The investigation into the structural failures of the homes in Mountainburg was conducted by the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management in conjunction with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They examined 23 structures that were damaged or destroyed. They found that only 4 had any form of wind-resistant construction. The rest were standard wood frame houses with no tie-downs, no hurricane clips, no reinforced corners. The mobile home park had no anchor systems. The 2 deaths occurred in structures that were not designed to withstand high winds. The woman's mobile home was a single-wide manufactured in 1995. It was not tied down, it was not insured. The man's house was a stick-built home with no reinforcement. The roof failed first, then the walls collapsed. The report recommended that the state adopt stricter building codes for manufactured homes in tornado-prone areas. The state did not adopt them. The manufactured home industry lobbied against it, arguing that the cost would be prohibitive. The state legislature instead passed a resolution encouraging voluntary use of tie-downs. The resolution had no enforcement mechanism. In 2020, a survey of mobile home parks in Crawford County found that only 23% had tie-downs installed. The broader question of shelter availability remains unaddressed. Mountainburg has 1 FEMA-compliant safe room in the high school. It can hold 400 people. The population of the town is 2,800. The school is located on the north side of town. The people in the southern part of town, where the tornado hit, would have to drive 2 miles to reach it. In a warning with only 6 minutes of lead time, that is not enough. The town does not have a public shelter in the southern part. The cost of building one was estimated at $400,000. The town applied for a FEMA grant in 2006. The application was denied due to insufficient benefit-cost ratio. The area is not considered a high-risk tornado zone because the frequency of tornadoes in the Boston Mountains is lower than in the plains. The probability of another tornado hitting the same spot is low. The system does not prioritize low-probability events, but for the people who live there, the probability is irrelevant. The memory is permanent. Every spring, when the first severe weather outbreak occurs, the parents in Mountainburg keep their children home from school. They check the sky. They watch the radar on their phones. They know the warning is not enough. They know the siren may not reach them. They know the shelter is far away. They rely on their own judgment and on the hope that the storm will pass to the north or the south. The event also changed how the National Weather Service communicates warnings. In 2010, the NWS introduced a new product called the impact-based warning. It was designed to provide more specific information, such as whether the tornado is rain-wrapped and whether it is particularly dangerous. The goal was to increase the sense of urgency. The new format was implemented in parts of the plains in 2005. It was rolled out nationally in 2005. But for the people in Mountainburg, the improved wording on a warning that arrives too late is of limited use. The real change came in 2014, when the State Emergency Management Agency launched a pilot program to install low-cost weather sirens in underserved communities. The program used a combination of state funds and donations from tornado survivors. Mountainburg was one of the first towns to receive a new siren. The program was praised by the National Weather Service, but it only installed 3 sirens in the entire county. The county has an area of 1,000 square miles. The sirens cover less than 5% of it. The legacy of the Mountainburg tornado is not in the statistics. It is in the small, personal decisions that people make every day because of it. The woman who now drives to the high school when she sees dark clouds. The man who bought a weather radio and keeps it plugged in next to his bed. The family that installed a basement-safe room in their new house. The school that runs a drill every April 9th at 5:27 p.m. These measures were not mandated. They were chosen, but they are not enough. The system that failed in 2008 is still failing in other towns, other counties, other states. Every year, tornadoes kill people who do not hear the warning, do not have a shelter, do not believe the storm will hit them. The lessons of Mountainburg are known, they are taught, they are studied. But they are not fully applied. The gap between knowledge and action is perhaps the hardest gap to close, and that is the ongoing tragedy of the Mountainburg tornado. It is not that the warning system had a flaw. It is that the flaw was known, the radar gap was known. The lack of sirens in the southern part of town was known. The vulnerability of mobile homes was known. The poverty of the residents was known. None of these were secrets, they were facts. And the town, the county, the state, the nation all chose not to fix them before the storm came. After the storm, some things changed. The shelter was built, the second siren was installed, the spotter network grew, the NWS improved its warnings, but the fundamental vulnerability remains. The terrain still blocks the radar, the mountains still muffle the sirens, the mobile homes are still not tied down, the poor still live in the most fragile structures. The Memorial Day weekend of 2019 brought a severe weather outbreak to the Ozarks. A tornado warning was issued for Crawford County at 6:45 p.m. The storm that produced it was 2 counties to the west. The sirens in Mountainburg were activated as a precaution. High school shelter was opened. About 60 people showed up. The storm passed to the north. No one was hurt, but the test revealed that the new siren could be heard in the southern part of town. The old siren could not. The town had learned. But the question remains, how many more towns will have to learn this way? How many more storms will have to expose the gaps? How many more people will have to die before the system is adequate for every vulnerable community, not just those that can afford to rebuild? The Mountainburg tornado of April 9, 2008 was not the deadliest. It was not the widest. It was not the most powerful. It was not even the most notable of that outbreak. But it is remembered because it showed in clear and painful detail the difference between a timely warning and a life saved. That difference was 6 minutes, and 6 minutes was not enough. That is the measure of the failure. That is the lesson. And that is the story that continues to echo through the hills of western Arkansas every spring when the clouds gather and the sirens sound. In the days following the tornado, the residents of Mountainburg began the slow work of recovery. The debris field stretched for nearly a mile, a diagonal scar through the trees. On the morning of April 10, 2008, emergency crews from Crawford County and the Arkansas National Guard arrived to conduct search and rescue operations. They were joined by volunteers from surrounding towns, many of whom had brought chainsaws, generators, and bottled water. The road into the southern part of town was blocked by fallen power lines and uprooted oaks. It took 6 hours to clear a single lane. The 2 victims were formally identified by the coroner that afternoon. The woman who died in the mobile home was 53 years old. She had lived alone for 12 years after her husband passed away. She had no children. Her nearest relative was a sister in North Carolina. The sister was notified by phone. She did not have the money to travel to Arkansas for the funeral. The body was cremated. The man who died in his house was 61. He was a retired construction worker. He had been living in Mountainburg for 30 years. His wife had left him the year before. He had been drinking that afternoon, according to the autopsy report. The alcohol level in his blood was 1:2. The report noted that this may have impaired his reaction time when the warning was issued. But even with a clear mind, the path to the storm cellar was through the backyard and around the side of the house. The door to the cellar had a padlock that required a key. The key was on a hook inside the house. The man would have had to go back inside to get it. By the time he did, the tornado was there. The town held a memorial service on April 12th at the high school gymnasium. Approximately 400 people attended. The mayor spoke. A pastor from the local Baptist church offered a prayer. The names of the 2 victims were read aloud and a moment of silence followed. Then the town turned to the practical matter of rebuilding. FEMA arrived that same week and set up a disaster recovery center in the town hall. 87 households applied for assistance. The total amount of federal aid approved was just under $430,000. That covered temporary housing, home repairs, and personal property losses. But the average payout per household was less than $5,000. That was not enough to replace a mobile home, which typically cost $30,000 to $40,000. Most of the families in the mobile home park did not have insurance. They were renting. The park owner had liability insurance but not property coverage on the units themselves. 16 families were displaced. Some moved into motels in Van Buren. Others stayed with relatives. 2 families left the county entirely. The town's only grocery store, a small market on Highway 71, was destroyed. The owner, a man in his late 60s, had operated it for 23 years. He did not have insurance. The building was a total loss. He decided not to rebuild. The store's closure meant that residents without cars had to travel 12 miles to Fort Smith to buy food. The convenience store at the gas station remained open, but it sold mostly packaged snacks and drinks. For fresh produce and meat, the drive was necessary. The town's elderly population was especially affected. The senior center, which had provided meals 3 times a week, was also damaged in the storm. It took 8 months to repair. During that time, the county health department arranged a mobile meal delivery service, but it only reached 23 people. The psychological impact was more difficult to quantify. The local mental health clinic reported a 50% increase in patients seeking treatment for anxiety in the 3 months after the tornado. Several residents reported nightmares, hypervigilance, and a persistent fear of storms. One woman whose house was severely damaged but not destroyed told a reporter that she could not sleep without a weather radio under her pillow. She kept it tuned to the National Weather Service frequency. She said she woke up every time the alert tone sounded, even if the warning was for a county far away. Her husband said she had not been like that before. The clinic offered free counseling sessions for 4 weeks. After that, the funding ran out. The National Weather Service office in Tulsa conducted a post-storm survey of the warning system within a week of the tornado. The survey was published as part of a larger report on the April 9th outbreak. The report acknowledged that the radar gap in the Boston Mountains was a known problem. The radar beam from the Tulsa WSR Radar D was blocked by terrain at low levels. The report recommended that the NWS explore alternative methods of detection, such as supplemental radar or increased use of spotter reports. In 2011, the NWS began testing mobile radar units mounted on trucks. One of those units was deployed to western Arkansas in 2013 as part of a pilot program. But the unit was only available during severe weather outbreaks, not year-round. It was also stationed near Fort Smith, 18 miles north of Mountainburg. The terrain issue remained unresolved for the immediate area. The Federal Communications Commission also reviewed the performance of the siren system. The FCC found that the siren in southern Mountainburg had been placed on a power pole at the intersection of Highway 71 and County Road 145. The siren signal was blocked by the ridge to the west. The FCC recommended that the town install a second siren on the opposite side of the ridge. The town applied for a grant through the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management. The grant was approved in 2010. The second siren was installed in 2011, nearly 3 years after the tornado. It cost $42,000. It was tested on the first Tuesday of every month. In 2012, a survey of residents found that 82% could hear the new siren from their homes. That was an improvement, but it still left 18% inaudible. The town did not have the funds for a third siren. The broader question of infrastructure funding became a recurring theme in the decade that followed. In 2014, the Arkansas legislature debated a bill that would require all new mobile home parks to install anchor systems and provide access to a storm shelter. The bill was supported by the Arkansas Association of Realtors and opposed by the Arkansas Manufactured Housing Association. The opposition argued that the requirement would increase the cost of rental housing and make it unaffordable for low-income families. The bill passed the House but died in the Senate after heavy lobbying. The Manufactured Housing Association donated $23,000 to state senators in the 2014 election cycle. The bill did not come up again. In 2016, a study by the University of Oklahoma's Center for Analysis and Prediction of Storms examined the effectiveness of tornado warnings in the Ozarks. The study found that the average lead time in the Boston Mountains was 40% lower than the national average. The primary cause was the radar gap. The secondary cause was the lack of dual polarization radar, which was being installed nationwide at the time. The Tulsa radar was upgraded to dual polarization in 2012, but that only improved the ability to detect debris and precipitation, not to see below the terrain. The study recommended that the NWS consider deploying a mobile X-band radar in the region. The cost of a permanent X-band radar site was estimated at $800,000. The National Weather Service did not include that in its budget requests. The human cost of these systemic gaps continued to accumulate in other places. In 2011, a tornado struck the town of Atkins, Arkansas, about 80 miles east of Mountainburg. That tornado was rated EF2. It killed 2 people, both in mobile homes. In 2015, a tornado hit Springdale, Arkansas, about 50 miles north of Mountainburg. It killed 1 person, also in a mobile home. In 2018, a tornado struck Van Buren, the county seat of Crawford County. That tornado was rated E-phone. It caused no deaths, but it damaged several homes that were not tied down. Each of these events prompted local discussions about shelter access and warning systems. Each time, the cost of mitigation was cited as the barrier. The personal stories from Mountainburg continued to circulate in the years after the tornado. One story that received attention was that of a family who had built a safe room in their basement in 20Rosevin. The safe room was constructed according to FEMA guidelines. It cost $15,000. The family of 4 lived in the southern part of town, less than a quarter mile from the mobile home park where the woman died. When the tornado warning was issued at 5:21 p.m., the father was in the garage. He heard the siren from the old system, which was just barely audible in that location. He went inside, gathered his wife and 2 children, and they went down to the safe room. They closed the door. The tornado passed over them at 5:27 p.m. They heard the roar, felt the pressure change, and then silence. When they emerged, their house was still standing. The roof was damaged, but the walls were intact. The safe room had no structural damage. The family later said that they built the safe room because the father had read a story about the 1999 Bridge Creekmore tornado. He said he wanted to be prepared. He had not known about the Mountainburg tornado until after it happened. He did not know that he was living in the same radar gap. That family's experience underscores a central irony of the Mountainburg story. The warning system failed because of terrain, but the terrain also meant that tornadoes were relatively rare in the Boston Mountains. The probability of a tornado hitting the same town twice in a lifetime was extremely low. So the decision to invest in shelters and sirens was a matter of risk perception. The residents of Mountainburg understood that risk in a visceral way after 2008. But the state and federal governments, which allocate resources based on statistical risk models, did not rank Crawford County as a high priority. The cost-benefit analysis used by FEMA for shelter grants considered the number of people at risk, the frequency of events, and the cost of construction. Mountainburg's low frequency meant a low benefit-cost ratio. The system was designed to maximize the overall reduction in fatalities across the country, not to eliminate risk in every community. That is a rational approach. But for the people who live in the low-frequency zones, rationality is cold comfort. In 2019, the town of Mountainburg held a ceremony to mark the 11th anniversary of the tornado. The mayor unveiled a small plaque on the wall of the high school shelter. The plaque listed the names of the 2 victims. It also included the names of the volunteer firefighters who responded that night, the teachers who opened the school for shelter, and the families who donated food and clothing. The ceremony was attended by about 50 people. The sky was clear. No storms were forecast. The question that lingers after all these years is not whether the warning could have been more timely. It could have been. The radar gap was known, the siren was inadequate, the mobile homes were unanchored, the poverty was visible. The question is why those facts did not lead to action before the storm. The answer is a complex mix of cost, inertia, lobbying, and the inherent difficulty of preparing for events that may not occur in a single human lifetime. The Mountainburg tornado was a reminder that risk is not evenly distributed and that the burden of preparation falls most heavily on those least able to bear it. And so the story of April 9, 2008 is not a story of a single tornado. It is a story of a system that works well for many but not for all. It is a story of a town that learned what it cost to be forgotten by the radar. It is a story of 2 people who died because the gap in the coverage was exactly where they lived. And it is a story that continues to unfold, every spring, in every small town in America that sits behind a ridge, beyond a siren, or under a mobile home roof that was never tied down. The warning system has improved since 2008. The radar network has been upgraded, the storm spotter programs have grown, the cell phone alerts now reach millions, but the fundamental geography of the Ozarks has not changed. The mountains still block the beam, the valleys still trap the sound, the poor still live in the places that are hardest to protect. And every year when the first tornado warning of the season is issued for Crawford County, the parents in Mountainburg will remember. They will look at the radar on their phones, they will count the miles between the storm and their homes, they will listen for the siren that may or may not reach them, and they will hope that 6 minutes is enough. For most of them it will be, but not for all. And that is the ongoing tragedy of the Mountainburg tornado. It is a tragedy that does not end when the debris is cleared. It is a tragedy that repeats in different forms in different places every time a warning arrives too late for someone who needed it sooner. This is the landscape of tornado risk in rural America. It is not a matter of technology. It is a matter of equity. And as long as the cost of a safe room is beyond the reach of the people who need it most, the gap between the warning and the shelter will remain. The story of Mountainburg is not closed. It is still being written, one storm at a time, in the towns that the radar cannot see. In 2012, the Crawford County Office of Emergency Management applied for a hazard mitigation grant from FEMA. The grant was intended to replace the aging siren system in Mountainburg and 2 other unincorporated communities in the Boston Mountains. The application requested $120,000 for 8 new outdoor warning sirens, each with backup battery power and a range of 2 miles. FEMA approved the grant in early 2003. The county matched 10% of the cost. By the end of that year, 4 new sirens were installed in Mountainburg. One was placed near the high school. Another was placed near the mobile